The wagon wheels groaned against the red earth, kicking up clouds of dust that settled on everything like a shroud. Grace Sullivan pressed her palm against the rough wooden slat, feeling splinters bite into her skin as the orphanage disappeared behind a hill. The smell of burnt wood from someone's campfire mixed with leather and sweat, creating a scent she'd forever associate with endings. She was 19, old enough to know what being sold meant, young enough to still hope she was wrong. "Stop your fidgeting." "Mrs." Henrietta Blackwood snapped from her perch at the front of the wagon. The woman's face was as weathered as old boot leather, her eyes sharp as a hawk's when counting coins. "You'll fetch a fair price if you don't look so skittish. Men don't pay for frightened rabbits." Grace bit back her response. After 12 years in St. Catherine's orphanage, she'd learned when words were weapons and when they were wasted breath. The other girls in the wagon, Mary with her corn silk hair, little Sarah who couldn't be more than 16 despite what Mrs. Blackwood's papers claimed, and dark-eyed Rosa all wore the same careful mask of nothing. The New Mexico territory stretched endlessly before them. Mesquite trees dotted the landscape like stubborn soldiers, their thorny branches reaching toward a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Ravens circled overhead, their cries mixing with the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional crack of the driver's whip. "Where are we going?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "Wherever pays best," Rosa answered before Mrs. Blackwood could. She'd been through this before. Grace realized. The knowing in her eyes was terrible. They stopped at a trading post 2 days into the journey. The men there looked at them like cattle at auction, and Grace forced herself to stare past them at the horizon. Mrs. Blackwood conducted her business with the efficiency of someone who'd sold many things. Dry goods, horses, people, it was all commodity to her. "The Monroe Ranch," she announced upon return. "He's particular, that one. Wants someone who can read and write, do figures. That's you. Sullivan." Grace's stomach twisted. She'd hidden her education at the orphanage, knowing it made her different, dangerous even. But Sister Catherine had found out, had put it in her file. Now it had marked her for what? The rain started as they climbed into the foothills. Fat drops at first, then sheets of water that turned the road to mud. The wagon struggled, wheels catching in ruts. Grace pulled her thin shawl tighter. The wool long ago sold for food money at the orphanage. "Almost there," Mrs. Blackwood said, checking a piece of paper she kept in her leather purse. "The Monroe place sits up that ridge." Grace saw it through the rain, a modest cabin built of logs and determination, smoke rising from a stone chimney. A barn sat to one side, and she could make out a corral with a few horses. It looked lonely, pressed against the mountain like it was hiding from the world. The wagon stopped. Mrs. Blackwood climbed down, her boots squelching in the mud. "Wait here." She knocked. Grace watched, rain streaming down her face, as the door opened. Elijah Monroe was not what she'd expected. He leaned heavily on the doorframe, his left leg clearly favoring his weight. Dark hair fell across a face that might have been handsome once, before something had carved deep lines around his mouth and eyes. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, white against sun-weathered skin. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as winter storm clouds, holding the kind of emptiness she'd seen in soldiers who'd come begging at the orphanage gates. Money changed hands. Mrs. Blackwood counted it twice, her fingers quick and sure. Then she turned, gestured sharply, "Out!" Grace's legs shook as she climbed down. The other girls watched. Sarah with tears, Rosa with that terrible knowing, Mary with something like relief that it wasn't her. "Can read, write, and do figures," Mrs. Blackwood said briskly. "Clean, no diseases, monthly bleedings regular, good teeth. She'll serve." Elijah Monroe's expression didn't change. "Leave her things." "She hasn't got any." "Then leave." Mrs. Blackwood climbed back onto the wagon without a backward glance. Grace stood in the rain, watching her last connection to the world she knew disappear down the mountain road. Inside, his voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. The cabin was warm, blessedly so. A fire crackled in the hearth, and Grace stood dripping on a woven rug, unsure what came next. She'd prepared herself for the worst, had steeled her mind against what men did to women they bought. But Elijah Monroe just limped to a chair by the fire, his movements careful and pained. "You can have the loft," he said without looking at her. "There's a ladder, blankets up there." "Sir, I'll not have you in my bed." The words came out harsh, final. "I need someone to keep house, tend the animals when I can't, handle the ledgers. The woman in town who did it died last month. That's all." Grace blinked rain from her eyes. Or maybe tears. "I don't understand." He finally looked at her then, those gray eyes holding something she couldn't name. "I paid for help, not a companion. You do the work. You get food and shelter. End of each month. I'll give you $2 of your own. Save it. Spend it. I don't care. But I won't have anyone here against their will, no matter what that woman's papers say." "Then why?" "Because if I didn't buy you, someone else would have." He turned back to the fire. "And they might have different ideas about what they paid for. Now get dry before you catch fever. Can't afford to lose another worker to illness." Grace climbed to the loft on unsteady legs. It was small but clean, with a proper bed and thick blankets that smelled of cedar. A small window looked out over the valley, now hidden by rain and approaching dark. She sat on the bed, trying to understand. She'd been sold, that was certain. But this man, this broken soldier who moved like each step cost him, claimed he wanted only work. The relief should have been overwhelming. Instead, she felt lost, unmoored. Below, she heard him moving about. The scrape of a pot, the splash of water, normal sounds of evening routine. Through a gap in the floorboards, she could see him at the table, a ledger open before him. His hand shook slightly as he wrote, and she noticed a bottle of whiskey at his elbow, though he didn't drink from it. The rain drummed harder on the roof. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long and mournful. Grace pulled a blanket around her shoulders and watched the water stream down the window. She'd been sold to warm his bed. That's what everyone would think, what the other girls would assume happened here. But Elijah Monroe had looked at her with those empty eyes and seen, what, not a body to use, not property, despite the money that had changed hands. "I need someone to keep house," he'd said, as if it were that simple, as if she were hired help instead of bought goods. Grace lay back on the bed, still fully dressed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, learning his routines, understanding what he needed, finding her place in this strange half-life between slave and free. But tonight, she was dry and warm and untouched. It was more than she dared hope for when the wagon had rolled away from St. Catherine's that morning. The wolf howled again, closer now. Grace closed her eyes and listened to the rain, to the fire crackling below, to the sound of pages turning as a damaged man did his accounts by lamplight. She'd been sold, yes, but perhaps not into the hell she'd feared. Perhaps into something else entirely, though what that was, she couldn't yet say. The morning would tell. The morning always told. The rooster's crow came before dawn, sharp and insistent. Grace woke to frost on the window and her breath misting in the cold air. Her first morning at the Monroe Ranch, and already she could feel the weight of work waiting. She dressed quickly in the same worn dress from yesterday, her only dress, and climbed down the ladder. Elijah was already up, stoking the fire with careful movements. His legs seemed stiffer in the morning cold. "Coffee's on," he said without turning. "Beans and salt pork in the larder. We eat simple here." Grace found the larder, a small room off the kitchen stocked with preserves, dried goods, and smoked meat. She'd cooked for dozens at the orphanage, stretching nothing into something, This was luxury by comparison. "How do you take your coffee, Mr. Monroe?" "Black, and it's just Elijah." He limped to the table, favoring his left leg heavily. "The animals need feeding first. I'll show you." The barn was warmer than expected, filled with the sweet smell of hay and horses. 3 horses occupied the stalls, a bay mare, a spotted gelding, and a magnificent black stallion who pinned his ears at their approach. "That's Tempest," Elijah said. "Don't go near him. He's particular. The others are Belle and Chester. They're gentle enough." He showed her the feed routine, how much grain, where the water barrels were kept. His hands were steady and sure with the animals, different from the tremor she'd noticed last night. Grace watched him run a curry comb over Belle's coat, the mare leaning into his touch. "You know horses?" he asked. "A little. The orphanage kept 2 for the wagon." "Good. You'll need to handle them when I can't." He didn't elaborate on when that might be, but Grace had already noticed the bottle of laudanum on the kitchen shelf, the way he gripped the stall door when his leg buckled slightly. The morning settled into a rhythm. Breakfast, simple but filling. Then the chickens, scattered behind the barn in a fenced yard. They had names, which surprised her. Elijah pointed them out. Henrietta Grace flinched at that. Mabel, Dorothy, and 6 others. "The brown ones mean," he warned. "Peck your hand bloody if you're not quick." He was right. Grace learned to scatter feed wide and grab eggs fast. By the time she'd finished, her fingers were numb with cold. "Spring'll be here soon," Elijah said, watching her blow on her hands. "Gets easier then." They worked through the morning, mostly in silence. He showed her how to mend the fence where rabbits had been getting through, how to check the horses' hooves for stones, how to read the sky for weather. His instructions were brief but clear, and he didn't hover or criticize when she made mistakes. Noon brought the first test. A rider appeared on the ridge, a man in a worn coat who hailed the house with familiar ease. "Ma Monroe, you in there?" Elijah's expression closed off. "Stay inside," he told Grace, but she watched through the window. The visitor was younger than Elijah, with the easy smile of a man who'd never met real trouble. His eyes swept the yard, lingered on the wash Grace had started, narrowed with interest. "Heard you got yourself some help." The man said, "Mrs. Blackwood was bragging in town about the price she got." "What do you want?" "Carl." "Just neighboring. Thought I'd see if you needed anything from town." But his gaze kept drifting to the house. "Must be nice, having a woman's touch around here again." "The lady's here to work, nothing more." Carl's smile widened. Sure. Just like Maria was here to work, too, before." "Get off my land." The words came quiet, but carried weight. Carl's smile faltered. He raised his hands in mock surrender. No offense meant, just making conversation. He rode off, but Grace could see him looking back. Elijah stood in the yard long after he'd gone, hands clenched at his sides. "Who's Maria?" Grace asked when he came inside. His gray eyes went cold. "Nobody. Get back to work." The afternoon brought its own challenges. Elijah set her to splitting kindling while he worked on repairing a bridle. She'd never held an axe before, and it showed. After watching her nearly take off her own foot twice, he limped over. "Like this." He positioned himself behind her, his hands covering hers on the axe handle. "Use your whole body, not just your arms. Let the weight do the work." For a moment, they stood frozen. Grace could smell leather and wood smoke, feel the solid presence of him at her back. Then he stepped away quickly, as if burned. "Try again." She did, and this time the wood split clean. A small victory, but she felt it warm her more than the exercise. As the sun tracked across the sky, she began to understand the rhythm of the place. Everything had its time, its order. Elijah moved through the tasks with the efficiency of long practice, accommodating his injury without acknowledging it. When his leg gave out while carrying water, he simply shifted the bucket to his other hand and kept going. "I could do that," Grace offered. "I'm not an invalid." But an hour later, when she quietly took the bucket from beside the door and filled the kitchen barrel herself, he didn't protest. Dinner was venison stew, reheated from what she found in the cold cellar. Elijah ate mechanically, his attention on the ledger open beside his plate. "You really can read?" he asked suddenly. "Yes, and write. Do figures too." "Show me." He pushed the ledger toward her. Grace studied the columns. Feed costs, livestock sales, supplies from town. His handwriting was cramped but clear. "You're paying too much for grain," she said after a moment. "The trading post charges 30% more than the mill in town." "The mill owner won't sell to me." "Why not?" He took the ledger back. Old disagreement. Grace wanted to press, but something in his expression warned her off. Instead, she cleared the dishes, heated water for washing. The domestic routine felt strange after the orphanage's communal chaos. There, she'd been one of many. Here, each action felt weighted with significance. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. Elijah banked the fire, checked the locks. A nightly ritual, she realized. He paused at the bottom of the loft ladder. "You did well today." "Thank you. Tomorrow we'll go to town. You'll need supplies, proper clothes." "I can't," she stopped. "Can't afford it, can't accept charity. Both were true." "Consider it wages advanced," he said roughly. "Can't have you freezing come the real cold." He turned away before she could respond. Limping to his own room off the main space, Grace climbed to the loft, her muscles aching from the unfamiliar work. Through her small window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the wolves again. Closer to the barn, Tempest whinnied, a wild, challenging sound. But inside, the fire crackled peacefully, and Grace found herself oddly content despite everything. She'd been sold, yes, but today she'd split wood, gathered eggs, tended horses, real work, with purpose. And Elijah Monroe, for all his gruffness and secrets, had treated her like a person rather than property. It wasn't freedom, the money that had changed hands between him and Mrs. Blackwood made that clear. But it wasn't the nightmare she'd prepared for either. As she drifted towards sleep, she heard Elijah moving below, the clink of glass, the laudanum bottle. She guessed, a low groan as he settled into bed. Whatever had damaged his leg caused him constant pain, though he'd never mentioned it during their long day of work. Grace pulled the blankets higher, thinking of Carl's visit, of the name Maria spoken like a curse. There were mysteries in this house, ghosts that walked beside the living, but for now, she was warm and fed and safe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Town meant people, meant questions, meant facing what everyone would assume about her position here. But tonight, listening to the old house settle around her, Grace allowed herself a small measure of hope. She'd survived her first day. She could survive whatever came next. The wolf howled again, but it seemed less mournful now, more like a greeting, like something wild recognizing another survivor in the darkness. The fever came 3 weeks later, swift and merciless as a desert storm. Grace found Elijah collapsed by the barn door at dawn, his face flushed and burning. His leg, the damaged one, had swollen beneath his trousers, the old wound angry and infected. "Leave me," he muttered as she struggled to help him stand. "Just see to the animals. The animals can wait." She'd grown stronger in her weeks here, muscles developing from the constant work. Still, supporting his weight tested every ounce of that new strength. "Lean on me." They made it to the house in halting steps. Elijah's skin burned through his shirt, and he mumbled words she couldn't catch names, places, fragments of memory loosed by fever. Grace had seen plenty of sickness at the orphanage. She knew what to do. even as fear crawled up her spine. Out here, with the nearest doctor a day's ride away. Infection could mean death. She got him to his bed, then set about gathering what she needed. Clean water, lots of it. The bottle of whiskey from the high shelf, better than nothing for cleaning wounds. Torn strips of her petticoat for bandages. No. Elijah protested weakly when she began unbuttoning his shirt. Not proper. Proper's got nothing to do with dying, Grace said firmly. She'd found her voice in these weeks. The quiet strength that came from being needed. Now hold still. The wound on his leg was worse than she'd imagined. An old bullet wound, badly healed, now reopened and seeping. The skin around it burned red and tight. Grace bit her lip, forcing her hand steady as she cleaned it. Elijah cried out, his hand catching hers with surprising strength. "Maria!" "It's Grace," she said softly. "You're at home. You're safe." His gray eyes focused on her for a moment, confused. "Grace, the orphan girl." "That's right. Now let me work." The day blurred into a battle. Clean the wound. Force water past his lips. Cool his fever with wet cloths. When he thrashed, lost in memories of whatever war had marked him. She held him steady and spoke nonsense words of comfort. "Samuel, get down!" he shouted once, trying to rise. "The artillery!" "Shh! The war's over! You're home!" Night fell, but the fever didn't break. Grace lit every lamp, keeping the darkness at bay. She'd seen too many taken by fever in the orphanage, carried out under sheets while the living pretended to sleep. Not him, not on her watch. Around midnight, Elijah's ravings turned coherent, though no less painful to hear. "Should have died with them," he muttered. "Samuel, Marcus, good men, better men. Why did I come back?" Grace wrung out another cloth, placed it on his burning forehead. "Because someone needed you to." "No one needs broken things." His voice cracked. "Maria knew. Smart girl. Left before I could ruin her too." The pieces were falling together. The war wound, the woman who'd left, the self-imposed isolation. Grace found herself humming, an old lullaby the kind sisters used to sing. Her voice wasn't pretty, but it seemed to calm him. "My mother sang that," he said, surprisingly clear, before the cholera took her. "How old were you?" 8. Pa lasted another year, then the drink got him. His hand found hers, held it with fever-weak fingers. "You smell like lavender." Maria grew lavender. "Rest now. Save your strength." But he kept talking, the fever pulling out words he'd probably held for years. About the war, not which one, but it didn't matter. They were all the same in the dark, with boys dying in mud and the sound a man makes when grape shot finds him. About coming home to find everything changed, his body broken, his girl married to a shopkeeper who'd had sense enough not to enlist. "Can't blame her," he said. "What woman wants half a man?" "You're not half of anything," Grace said fiercely. "You're stubborn and difficult, and you drink too much laudanum. But you're not half of anything." He laughed, a rusty sound that turned into coughing. "Stubborn orphan girl, why'd you stay?" The question caught her off guard. "Where would I go?" "Anywhere. Take the money from the coffee tin. God knows I owe you more than $2 a month for this." "I'm not leaving." "Why?" Grace wrung out the cloth again. Buying time. Why had she stayed? The work was hard, the isolation complete. She could have run weeks ago, taken his advice about the coffee tin and disappeared into the territory. "Because you see me," she said finally. "Not what I was bought for, not what everyone assumes. You see Grace, who can split wood and tend horses and read your ledgers. That's worth more than money." His fever-bright eyes studied her face. "You stayed," he repeated, wonder in his voice. The night wore on. Grace lost track of how many times she cleaned the wound, forced water past his cracked lips, sang half-remembered lullabies. When exhaustion threatened to take her, She thought of him standing in the yard that first night, paying money he probably couldn't spare to save her from a worse fate. Dawn came gray and uncertain. Elijah's fever still raged, but he'd stopped thrashing. Grace allowed herself 5 minutes to step outside, breathe the cold morning air, and pray to whoever might be listening. The horses needed tending. The chickens would be demanding their feed, but she couldn't leave him, not when the fever might spike again. "Miss?" Grace spun around. A boy stood at the gate, maybe 12, with a shock of red hair and clothes that had seen better days. "I'm Tom, from the Garrett place down the valley. Ma sent me to see if Mr. Monroe needed anything from town." Grace nearly cried with relief. Yes, we need the doctor. Mr. Monroe's taken fever from an old wound." Tom's eyes widened. "I'll ride fast. Doc Morrison should be at home. Is Mr. Monroe gonna be all right?" "He will be." Grace said it firmly, as if speaking could make it true. "Tell the doctor to hurry." The boy ran for his horse. Grace watched him go, then returned to her vigil. Elijah was mumbling again, but softer now. She caught her name among the rambling words. "Still here," she told him, taking his hot hand in hers. "Not going anywhere." The sun climbed higher. Grace bathed his face, checked the wound, still angry but no worse. She'd done all she could. Now they waited. "Grace!" His voice came clear suddenly. "Water!" She helped him drink, supporting his head. His eyes focused on her face, truly seeing her for the first time since the fever took him. "You stayed," he said again, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "Through the night." "Of course I did." "I called you Maria." "You did. It's all right." He closed his eyes, but his hand tightened on hers. "I'm glad it's you instead." The doctor arrived at noon, a gruff man who took one look at the wound and set about his business with practiced efficiency. Grace held Elijah steady as the doctor cleaned and dressed the wound properly, applied a poultice that smelled of herbs and something sharp. "You did well," Doc Morrison told her when he'd finished. "Probably saved his life. That wound goes septic. We'd be digging a grave instead of changing bandages." He left medicines, instructions, a promise to return in 2 days. Grace walked him out, legs shaky with exhaustion and relief. "You're the girl from Blackwood's group," the doctor said, studying her. It wasn't a question. "I work for Mr. Monroe as housekeeper." His expression was knowing, but not unkind. "Well, housekeeper, he's lucky to have you. Not many would have fought so hard for a difficult man's life." After he left, Grace returned to find Elijah sleeping peacefully. The fever had broken, leaving him pale but breathing steady. She allowed herself to sink into the chair beside his bed, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. "Grace," his voice, weak but clear. "I'm here." "The animals will survive 1 day without us. Rest." He turned his head to look at her. "Thank you." "You'd have done the same." "No," he said quietly. "I wouldn't have, not before, but maybe now I would." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, straightened his covers instead. "Sleep. I'll be here when you wake." "I know," he said, and the trust in those 2 words was worth more than any wages. "You stayed." As he drifted back to sleep, Grace kept watch. The crisis had passed, but something had shifted between them. In his fever, he'd shown her the broken places inside him. In her care, she'd shown him that broken didn't mean worthless. Outside, she could hear the chickens complaining about their late breakfast. Chester whinnied from the barn. Life went on, demanding attention. But for now, Grace sat beside a sleeping man who'd bought her freedom without knowing it, and felt something like home settling around her shoulders. She'd been sold to warm his bed. Instead, she'd cooled his fever, cleaned his wounds, kept the darkness at bay with lullabies and steady hands. And in doing so, she'd found something she hadn't known she was looking for, a place where Grace Sullivan mattered, not as property or purchase, but as herself. The morning sun slanted through the window, painting golden squares on the rough wooden floor. Elijah's breathing deepened into true sleep. Grace finally closed her eyes, allowing herself to rest. They'd won this battle. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The recovery was slow. 2 weeks passed before Elijah could walk to the porch unaided. Another before he could manage the barn. Grace found herself running the ranch, making decisions she'd never imagined making. Which horses to grain, when to move the chicken's coop, how to patch the roof where spring rain had found its way through. "You're getting soft," she told Chester one morning, noting his expanding belly. "No more extra oats for you." The horse nickered, nudging her shoulder with his velvet nose. She'd grown fond of him, of all of them except Tempest, who still pinned his ears whenever she passed. Inside, Elijah sat at the table, sketching. He'd taken to it during his convalescence, filling pages with drawings of horses, the view from the window, sometimes just abstract patterns. Grace brought him coffee, glanced at today's work. It was a woman's face, delicate and lovely, with dark hair piled high. "Maria?" she asked, setting the cup down carefully. He nodded, not looking up. "I owe you her story, after what you did." Grace sat across from him, waiting. She'd learned patience here, the value of silence. "Met her in Santa Fe," he began, pencil still moving across paper. "I was young, cocky, fresh from the war with a reputation for fast draws and faster horses. She was the banker's daughter. Should have known better than to look at someone like me." The pencil paused. "But she did look. We courted proper-like for 6 months. Her father hated it, but Maria had a spine of steel, said she'd marry who she chose. What happened? The war happened. Different war, same stupidity. I enlisted because that's what men did. Promised her I'd come back whole, marry her proper, give her the life she deserved." He laughed bitterly. "Came back with half a leg and nightmares that woke the whole boarding house. By then she'd waited 2 years. Her father had picked out a nice shopkeeper, safe, whole." Grace wanted to reach out, but didn't. She chose safety. "You can't blame her. I showed up at her wedding, drunk as a lord, leg barely healed, made a scene. Thomas, that was his name. Thomas Hartley. He just looked at me with pity. Didn't even throw a punch." "That must have been worse." "It was." He set down the pencil, finally meeting her eyes. "I left town that night, bought this place with my soldier's pension. Figured I'd hide here until... But Mrs. Blackwood found you." His jaw tightened. "Wasn't supposed to be permanent. Just needed help through the winter. But she knew what I was. A man with no family, no connections, nobody to ask questions if a girl disappeared. Perfect customer for her trade." Grace felt cold despite the warm morning. "You could have..." "What sent you back to her?" He shook his head. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Grace, things that wake me at night. But I won't add that to the list." They sat in silence, the ghost of Maria present in the penciled lines on paper. Grace understood now why he'd been so cold that first night, why he'd made it clear he wanted no companionship. He was still punishing himself for surviving, for wanting, for being human. "She was wrong," Grace said finally. "Who?" "Maria. She chose the unbroken man, but broken doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in." He stared at her, something shifting in his gray eyes. Then he crumpled the drawing, tossed it in the fire. Pretty words don't change facts. But that night, he joined her for dinner instead of taking his plate to his room. Progress. Small but real. The next test came 3 days later. Grace had gone to town for supplies, driving the wagon with newfound confidence. She was loading flour when she heard the whispers. "That's Monroe's girl." The one Blackwood sold him. I wonder how long before he tires of her. You know, Grace kept her head high, her hands steady. Let them talk. They didn't know about the night spent battling fever, the careful distance Elijah maintained, the slowly growing trust between two damaged people. But one voice cut through the others, sharp and familiar. Well, well, the orphans learned to drive. Mrs. Blackwood stood by the mercantile counter, her black dress impeccable despite the dust. Her smile was a blade. Mrs. Blackwood, Grace said evenly. How is dear Mr. Monroe still playing the gentleman? Is he? The older woman stepped closer, voice lowering. It won't last. You know, men have needs, and when he finally takes what he paid for, there won't be any pretty illusions left. You're wrong. Am I? We'll see. I've had word from some associates. There's need for girls in the mining camps. Good money. When Monroe's done with you, he won't be. Mrs. Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. They all say that, right up until they don't. Grace loaded the last of the supplies, her hands trembling with anger rather than fear. As she climbed onto the wagon seat, Mrs. Blackwood called out, I'll be checking on my investment, girl. Don't get too comfortable. The ride home felt longer than usual. Grace's mind churned with worry. Mrs. Blackwood's associates. She'd heard whispers about them. Men who collected girls for the rougher establishments. Places where youth and innocence commanded the highest prices. She found Elijah in the barn, working on Tempest's hooves. The stallion stood perfectly still for him, though his ears tracked Grace's approach. How was town? Elijah asked without looking up. Fine. Got everything on the list. She hesitated. Saw Mrs. Blackwood. His hand stilled, and she said she'd be checking on her investment. Elijah straightened slowly, his face hard. Did she threaten you? Not exactly, but she mentioned associates, mining camps. The hoof-pick hit the barn wall with considerable force. Tempest snorted, dancing sideways. Easy, boy. Elijah's voice gentled for the horse, but his eyes remained storm-dark. Grace, listen to me. You're not an investment. You're not property. And if Henrietta Blackwood or any of her associates come here, they'll learn what this used-up soldier can still do. You don't have to— Yes, I do. He limped closer, stopped just out of reach. I failed Maria by trying to be something I wasn't. I won't fail you by pretending I'm less than I am. Broken leg or not, I can still protect what's mine. I'm not yours, Grace said quietly. No, he agreed. You're your own person. But this ranch, this land, it's under my protection. And you're under that protection for as long as you choose to stay. The word hung between them. Choose. Always. He gave her that. That evening, as Grace prepared dinner, she noticed Elijah cleaning his rifle with particular care. An old army Colt appeared from somewhere, was loaded and placed within easy reach. Expecting trouble? She asked. Preparing for it. There's a difference. They ate in companionable silence, but Grace could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked to the windows. The shadows seemed deeper tonight, full of potential threat. Tell me about your parents, he said suddenly. Grace blinked at the change of subject. Not much to tell. My mother died birthing me. Father was a railroad worker. Died in a tunnel collapse when I was 7. No other family. An aunt, supposedly. But she never came for me. Grace pushed food around her plate. The sisters were kind enough. Taught me to read, write, said I had a quick mind. Fat lot of good it did me. It's doing good now. You've caught 3 errors in my ledgers this week alone. Bookkeeping for a hermit rancher? My aunt would be so proud. You're more than a bookkeeper. His voice was serious. You've kept this place running while I was laid up. Kept me from giving in to the fever. That's not nothing. Grace. She felt warmth bloom in her chest. You'd have done the same. Once, Maybe before. He stood, began banking the fire for the night. I'd like to teach you to shoot. Tomorrow. If you're willing. Why? Because the world's full of Henrietta Blackwoods, and I won't always be here. The word sent a chill through her. Are you going somewhere? No, but nothing's permanent. Better you can defend yourself than depend on a broken-down soldier. That night, Grace lay awake thinking about pencil sketches and old wounds, about women who chose safety and men who chose isolation, about Mrs. Blackwood's sharp smile and the sound of bullets being counted. Below, she could hear Elijah moving about, checking windows, doors, standing guard against dangers that might never come, or might arrive with tomorrow's dawn. She thought about the coffee tin with her slowly growing wages, about roads leading away from here, toward possibilities she couldn't imagine. But when she finally slept, she dreamed of staying, of spring turning to summer, of learning Tempest's trust, of evening meals where the ghosts grew quieter and the silences more comfortable. She dreamed of choosing this, broken man and all, and making something whole from the pieces. Spring arrived like a cautious visitor, testing the air before fully committing. Grace woke to birdsong and the smell of new grass. The world outside her window transformed from brown to tentative green. She'd been at the Monroe Ranch for 3 months now, long enough that the rhythms felt natural coffee before dawn. Animals fed as the sun crested the hills, the particular way Elijah liked his eggs, long enough that she'd stopped jumping at shadows, stopped expecting Mrs. Blackwood to appear at the gate with the armed men. "Hold it steady," Elijah instructed, adjusting her grip on the rifle. "Don't fight the weight. Let it settle." They stood behind the barn where he'd set up targets, old cans balanced on fence posts. Grace had progressed from the revolver to the rifle, her aim improving daily. "Breathe in," he coached, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Hold. Now squeeze. Don't jerk." The shot rang out. The can spun off the post. "Better." Pride colored his voice. "You're a natural." "I have a good teacher." Something flickered in his eyes before he stepped back, establishing distance. Always, he maintained that careful space between them, as if she might break if he came too close. Or perhaps it was himself he was protecting. Again, he said, 10 more shots. As Grace reloaded, she caught movement on the ridge. A rider, approaching fast. Elijah saw it too, his hand moving instinctively to the Colt at his hip. But it was only Tom Garrett, the red-haired boy who'd fetched the doctor. He slid off his horse, breathless with excitement. "Mr. Monroe, Miss Grace Ma sent me to warn you. There's men in town asking about bought girls. 3 of them, rough types. Sheriff Daniels told them to move on, but they rarely listen to sheriffs." Elijah finished grimly. "When did they arrive?" "Yesterday evening." They were drinking at Murphy's saloon, talking loud about collecting what's owed. Grace felt her stomach drop. Mrs. Blackwood's associates. "Thank your mother for the warning," Elijah told the boy, pressing a coin into his hand. "And Tom, stay clear of town for a few days." After the boy left, they stood in tense silence. Grace could see Elijah calculating, planning. "Pack a bag," he said finally. "Food, water, ammunition. There's a line shack up in the hills. If trouble comes." "I'm not running." "Grace." "No." She faced him squarely. "I've spent my whole life being shuffled from place to place, told where to go, what to do. I'm done running. These aren't town gossips or mean drunks. These are men who trade in human misery. I know what they are." Her voice stayed steady despite the fear. "And I know what I am. Not cargo to be collected, not property to be reclaimed. I'm Grace Sullivan, and this is my home now." "Your home," the words came soft, wondering. "If you'll have me." He stared at her for a long moment, something raw and vulnerable in his expression. then his jaw set with determination. Then we prepare for a fight. They spent the day readying. Elijah showed her defensive positions around the ranch, places where the terrain offered advantage. He cleaned every weapon they owned, checked ammunition, filled water barrels in case of siege. "You've done this before," Grace observed, watching him work. Different war, same principles: position, preparation, patience. He glanced at her. And something worth fighting for. As evening fell, they took supper on the porch, watching the road. The familiar ritual felt weighted with possibility. Perhaps their last peaceful meal, perhaps worry over nothing. "I've been thinking," Elijah said, setting down his coffee. "About choices." Grace waited. She'd learned he worked through thoughts like he worked through chores. Methodically, thoroughly. "All my life, I've made decisions for others. Enlisted because it was expected. Courted Maria because she was suitable. Bought you because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because I thought I was saving you. But I never asked what you wanted. You gave me wages, taught me skills. That's more choice than I've ever had. It's not enough." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small leather pouch. "Your wages to date, plus what I've added. Enough for stage fare to anywhere in the territory, California, if you want to go that far." Grace took the pouch, felt its weight. Freedom, tangible and real. "You deserve a choice," he continued, voice rough. "A real one. Stay or go. But let it be your decision. Not because you were bought, not because you feel obligated, but because you choose it." The money sat heavy in her hands. She thought of San Francisco, of possibilities endless as the ocean, of a life where no one knew she'd been sold, where she could invent herself anew. Then she looked at Elijah, scarred, stubborn, trying so hard to do right. She thought of mornings in the barn, evenings by the fire, of the way he'd said "you're home" like the words were precious. "I need to tell you something," she said. "That night you were fevered. You asked why I stayed. I said because you saw me. That was true, but not all of it." She stood, moved to the porch rail where she could see the stars beginning to emerge. "I stayed because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was living, learning, growing, being treated like I had worth beyond my hands or my face or what someone could sell me for." "Grace." Let me finish." She turned back to him. "You talk about Maria choosing safety, but she didn't just choose safety. She chose certainty. The shopkeeper was a known quantity. You, with your wounds and ghosts, were not." She stepped closer, noting how he tensed but didn't retreat. "I don't need certainty, Elijah. I've never had it anyway. What I need is respect, partnership, the chance to build something real." She held out the pouch. "I choose to stay. Not because I was bought, not because I have nowhere else, but because this is where I want to be." He stared at the offered money, then at her face. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." His hand closed over hers, warm and calloused. For a moment they stood frozen, the pouch pressed between their palms. Then, slowly, he drew her closer. "I'm not an easy man," he warned. "I'm not an easy woman." "I have nightmares, bad days when the leg won't hold, ghosts that won't stay buried. And I have fears of being owned again, anger at the world that let it happen once. We're both carrying scars." His free hand came up, fingertips barely grazing her cheek. "What do you want? Grace, truly." The question hung between them, weighted with more than the words themselves. What did she want, safety, security, love? "I want to plant a garden," she said, surprising herself. "Teach Tempest to trust me. Learn to read ledgers better. Watch the seasons change from that porch. I want ordinary days and the chance to choose them." "With me." "With you." He leaned closer, and she thought he might kiss her. Her heart hammered with anticipation, with fear, with want. But at the last moment he pulled back, some internal war playing across his features. "Not like this," he said roughly. "Not with them coming. Not with you thinking you have to—" "I don't think I have to do anything." But she understood. He needed her to be free before he could offer anything more. A sound from the road made them both turn. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders. Approaching fast. Elijah's demeanor shifted instantly from vulnerable to vigilant. "Inside," he ordered. "Remember what I taught you." Grace grabbed the rifle, checked it was loaded. Through the window, she could see 3 men dismounting at the gate. Even in the gathering darkness, they looked like trouble. Hard faces, well-armed, moving with predatory confidence. Monroe 1 called out, "We're here on business. Send out the girl and we'll be on our way." Elijah stepped onto the porch, rifle casual in his hands but ready. "Gentlemen, you're on private property." "Property that's harboring stolen goods," another said. "Mrs. Blackwood sent us to collect." "Hey, Mrs. Blackwood sold what wasn't hers to sell. The lady is here of her own free will." The men laughed. "Free will, that's rich. Come on, soldier boy. We know what you bought her for. Just tired of her now. Want your money back." "What I want," Elijah said evenly, "is for you to get off my land." Grace watched the men spread out, trying to flank the house. Her hands were steady on the rifle despite the fear coursing through her. These were the wolves' misses. Blackwood had threatened, come to drag her back to a life of degradation. "Last chance," the lead man called. "We've got legal papers." "Show them to the sheriff." "Already did. He suggested we work it out amongst ourselves." The man's grin was visible even in the darkness. "So, let's work it out." One of them went for his gun. Elijah was faster, despite the bad leg. His shot took the man's hat off, sent him diving for cover. "Next one won't miss," Elijah warned. What followed was tense, terrifying. The men took positions behind their horses, the water trough, anything that offered cover. Elijah held the porch, his military experience evident in how he used the minimal shelter. "Grace," he called without taking his eyes off the threat. "If this goes bad—" "It won't." She sighted down the rifle barrel, picking her target. All those hours of practice, all leading to this moment. "We do this together." A shot shattered the window beside her. Grace returned fire, her bullet striking wood near one attacker's head. The man cursed, ducked lower. "Girl shoots like a man," one shouted. "Blackwood didn't mention that." "Blackwood doesn't know everything," Grace called back. "Like how I choose to stay, how I'll keep choosing it." The standoff stretched, then, unexpected, came more hoofbeats. Tom Garrett again. But not alone. Sheriff Daniels rode with him, along with Doc Morrison and 2 other townsmen. "That's enough, boys," the sheriff called out. "Time to move along. We've got papers. And I've got a telegram from the territorial marshal about flesh traders working the area. Funny how the descriptions match you 3. The transformation was immediate. The men's bravado evaporated, replaced by the calculation of cornered animals. "This isn't over," the lead man snarled at Elijah. "Blackwood has reach." "Then she can reach all she wants." Sheriff Daniels said, "But she'll do it elsewhere. You boys have 10 minutes to clear out of my town." They left, but not without dark looks and darker promises. Grace stayed at the window until they were specks in the distance. "Why?" Elijah asked the sheriff. "You've never helped before." Daniels shrugged. "The doc told me how the girl saved your life. Tom's ma said she's been nothing but decent. Sometimes a man has to decide what kind of law he's going to enforce." He tipped his hat to Grace. "Ma'am, you need anything, you send word." After they left, Grace and Elijah stood in the bullet-scarred room, the reality of what had happened settling over them. "They'll be back," Grace said. "Maybe, but you heard the sheriff. We're not alone." He set his rifle aside, crossed to where she stood. "You were magnificent. I was terrified. Most courage happens when we're terrified. He touched her face again, and this time she leaned into it. Are you hurt? No, you... No. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Grace, She kissed him, not passionate, not demanding. Just a soft press of lips that said everything words couldn't. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with wonder. Too much, she asked. Not enough, he said hoarsely. But I meant what I said. I need you to be choosing freely. Not because of gratitude or circumstance or... Elijah Monroe, she interrupted. I just fought off flesh traders for the right to stay here. I think I've proven my choice is free. He laughed, a rusty sound that transformed his face. I suppose you have. So ask me again. What do I want? This time, when he leaned close, she met him halfway. The kiss was different now, deeper, surer, carrying promises of possibilities to come. When they finally parted, the moon had risen full and bright. I want you, she said simply. Broken parts, ghosts and all. I want the chance to see who we might be together. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. He took her hand, laced their fingers together. Then we try, day by day, choice by choice. They stood together on the porch of their battle-scarred home, watching the night settle peacefully over the ranch. Tomorrow would bring challenges, misses, Blackwood to deal with, repairs to make, a future to build. But tonight, Grace Sullivan stood free and choosing, her hand in that of a man who'd learned to see her truly. It was more than she'd dared dream when the wagon had rolled away from the orphanage. It was enough. It was everything. It was home. The storm came without warning, turning the afternoon sky black as cast iron. Grace rushed to secure the chickens while Elijah fought to get the horses into the barn. By the time they stumbled back to the house, they were soaked through, the temperature dropping fast. Get those wet clothes off, Elijah ordered, already pulling dry wood for the fire. Last thing we need is you catching pneumonia. Grace climbed to the loft, changed into her one other dress, still worn but dry. When she came back down, Elijah had the fire blazing and coffee heating. He'd changed too, his hair still damp and curling slightly. They worked in companionable silence, fixing what the wind had torn loose, mopping water that had blown under the door. Normal things, but weighted with the awareness that had grown between them since the night they'd fought off Blackwood's men 2 weeks ago. Since the night she'd kissed him. Since then, they'd danced around each other, closer than before, but careful too. Hands that brushed when passing dishes, eyes that held a moment too long. The space between them charged with possibility neither quite knew how to navigate. Thunder crashed overhead, making Grace jump. The lamp flickered. It'll pass, Elijah said, but his expression was troubled as he watched the storm's fury through the window. They settled by the fire. The account ledgers spread between them. Grace had taken over most of the bookkeeping now, her neat figures replacing his cramped scrawl. We're doing better, she observed, tallying the month's sales. If the cattle prices hold, we could expand the herd come fall. He looked up from oiling a bridle, something warm in his eyes. The ranch, she clarified, though they both knew she meant more. Maybe even hire proper help for the heavy work. Maybe. He set aside the bridle, his movements restless. Grace, I've been thinking. She waited, recognizing his tone. He'd been building to something for days. The sheriff's protection won't last forever. Blackwood will try again. Or someone like her. He stood, paced to the window. You should have legal protection. Papers that say you're free, not bought. What kind of papers? He turned, and she saw he was holding a document. I wrote to a lawyer in Santa Fe, had him draw this up. Grace took the paper, read it by lamplight. It was a certificate of employment, stating she was hired help, not purchased. that any claims on her person were null and void. At the bottom, Elijah's signature and a place for hers. "This makes it official," he said quietly. "You are nobody's property. Never were, far as the law's concerned." Her throat tightened. "Elijah." "There's more." He pulled out a second document. "Deed transfer, half the ranch, in your name. So you're not just hired help, you're a landowner. Nobody can force a landowner anywhere." Grace stared at the deed, unable to process the magnitude of what he was offering. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because it's everything you have. Because I haven't earned..." "Haven't earned..." His voice rose slightly. "You've kept this place running. Saved my life. Fought for the right to stay. How much more earning do you need?" She stood too, facing him across the small space. "This isn't necessary. I trust you." "It's not about trust. It's about making sure you're never vulnerable again. Never dependent on anyone's goodwill, including mine." "But why?" The question came out more plaintive than she'd intended. He stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Because I need you to know that what I'm about to say comes with no obligation. No price, no cage, no matter how golden." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you about to say?" His thumb traced her cheekbone, the touch feather-light. "That somewhere between that first night and now, I stopped thinking of you as someone I saved and started thinking of you as someone who saved me. That when I wake up, your name is my first thought. That when you smile at Chester or hum while you cook or bite your lip over the ledgers, I forget how to breathe." "Elijah, let me finish." His voice had gone rough. "I know what I am. Broken-down soldier with too many ghosts and not enough years left. I know what you could have. Young man, whole family, proper life in town. But I also know what I want. Maybe for the first time since the war." The storm raged outside, but Grace barely heard it. All her attention focused on this man who'd bought her freedom without knowing it, who was now trying to secure it beyond question. "What do you want?" she whispered. He drew a breath, and she could see the fear in his eyes. This soldier who'd faced battles and bullets, terrified of 3 simple words. "I want you," he said, "but not like..." He stopped, started again, the words coming with difficulty. "She was sold to warm his bed, but I don't want obedience. I want you." The words hung between them, raw and honest. He'd acknowledged the ugly transaction that brought them together, then rejected it entirely. He wasn't asking for submission or service. He was asking for her, Grace Sullivan, complete in choosing. "All of you," he continued, voice stronger now. "Your quick mind and sharp tongue. Your kindness with the animals and patience with my moods. Your courage and your fears and the way you've made this empty house feel like home. I want Sunday mornings and Tuesday storms and every ordinary day in between. But only if you want them too. Only if you choose them freely." Grace couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. She thought of all the ways this could go wrong. The age difference, the social stigma, the ghosts that still walked between them. Then she thought of all the ways it had already gone right. The trust built through work and sickness. The partnership that had grown so naturally she hadn't noticed until it was essential as breathing. "I need you to know," Elijah said, stepping back, giving her space, "that if you sign those papers and walk away tomorrow, I'll understand. I'll help you get wherever you want to go. But if you stay..." "If I stay..." "Then stay as my equal, my partner, He swallowed hard. "My wife, if you'll have me, not because you were bought or sold or had no choice, but because you choose it, free and clear." Grace looked at the papers in her hands. Freedom, security, independence. Everything she'd dreamed of in those dark nights at the orphanage. Then she looked at the man offering them. This complicated, difficult, wonderful man who'd seen her truly from the beginning. "You beautiful fool," she said softly. "Don't you understand I chose you weeks ago? Maybe that first night when you said you wouldn't have me in your bed. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because you thought I deserved better. Maybe when you taught me to shoot, trusting me with the means to leave. Maybe when you held my hand through your fever and called me by my own name." She set the papers aside, moved into his space. "I don't need deeds to make me stay, Elijah. I need what we've built. Respect, trust, partnership, love. If that's what this feeling is that makes my chest tight when you smile." "It's love," he confirmed, wonder in his voice. "At least, that's what I'm calling it." She laughed, the sound bright in the storm-darkened room. "Then I'll take your papers, because you're right, I should never be vulnerable again. But I'm not signing them because I need protection. I'm signing them because I want to build something with you. And equal partners should have equal stakes." "And the other," his voice was carefully neutral. "The offer of marriage." She pretended to consider. "Well, that depends. Are you proposing properly? Or do I have to prompt you through that too?" Despite everything, he laughed. Then, with effort that showed in every movement, he lowered himself to one knee. "Grace Sullivan, you impossible woman, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because anyone bought or sold or decided for you, but because you choose it." "Yes," she said simply. "I choose it. I choose you. I choose us." He stood, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her with all the pent-up longing of months of careful distance. Grace melted into it, into him, feeling safe and wanted and free all at once. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, she smiled up at him. "Though we should probably work on your proposal technique. That was a bit long-winded." "Woman," he growled, but he was smiling too. "I pour my heart out and you critique my technique. Someone has to keep you humble." They signed the papers there by firelight, rain lashing the windows. Grace Sullivan became a landowner, a free woman in law as well as fact. Then they sat together on the worn sofa, planning a future neither had dared imagine. "Small ceremony?" Grace said, "Just Doc Morrison and the sheriff as witnesses. Maybe Tom's family. Whatever you want, long as it's soon." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I've waited long enough to start living again. No more ghosts. They'll always be there," he said honestly. "But they're quieter now. Harder to hear over the sound of you laughing." They talked until the storm passed, leaving the world washed clean. As dawn broke, Grace stood at the window watching the sun paint the rain-washed land gold. "What are you thinking?" Elijah asked, coming up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. "That I was sold like cattle, shipped like goods, valued only for what service I could provide." She leaned back against him. "And somehow that led me here, to you, to home. Regrets? None. You. Only that it took so long to say the words." He turned her in his arms. "I love you, Grace, not as property or purchase, but as the woman who chose to stay." "And I love you," she replied, "not as master or provider, but as the man who chose to see me." Outside, the ranch came alive with morning sounds, horses nickering, chickens declaring the new day. Soon there would be chores, work, the constant demands of frontier life. But for now, they stood together in the doorway of their home, two people who'd found freedom in choosing each other. Mrs. Blackwood had sold her to warm a bed. Instead, Grace had warmed a heart, healed a home, claimed a life of her own making. It wasn't the fairy tale the orphan girl had dreamed of. It was better. It was real. It was theirs. The trouble came on a Tuesday, with the sun high and merciless. Grace was in the garden she'd started, coaxing life from the stubborn soil, when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. "Elijah," she called, straightening. Something in her voice brought him immediately from the barn, rifle in hand. 4 riders, not the same men from before, but cut from similar cloth-hard faces, trail-worn clothes, the bearing of those who lived outside civilization's edges. Behind them, A wagon. Grace's blood chilled when she saw who drove it. Mrs. Blackwood, dressed in funeral black despite the heat, her face a mask of cold fury. "Inside," Elijah ordered. But Grace shook her head. "No, we face this together." He looked at her, his wife of 3 weeks now, the simple gold band on her finger catching the light, and nodded. Together then. They stood side by side as the party approached. Grace had the Colt at her hip, Elijah his rifle casual but ready. The riders stopped just outside comfortable shooting distance, spreading out in practiced formation. "Mr. Monroe." "Mrs." Blackwood called, her voice carrying like a whip crack. "I hear congratulations are in order. You've married my property." "I've married a free woman," Elijah replied evenly, "as the law recognizes." "Laws?" She spat the word. "Paper doesn't change facts. I paid good money for her at that orphanage. She was bought and sold legal-like. Your sham marriage doesn't alter that." "Show me a bill of sale," Grace challenged, stepping forward. "Show me papers that say you own a person like they're cattle." "Mrs." Blackwood's smile was sharp as glass. "Oh, I have papers. Girl, indenture contracts, debt transfers, all perfectly legal." "Forgeries," Elijah said. "We both know it." "Prove it." She gestured to her men. "In the meantime, I'm collecting what's mine. And if you've damaged the goods, Monroe, there'll be compensation required." One of the riders, a scarred man with dead eyes, spoke up. "Boss, if he's been using her, she's worth less to the houses. Maybe we should—" "Quiet, Marcus." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes never left Grace's face. "I'm sure, mister, Monroe has been a perfect gentleman. Haven't you, soldier boy, still playing the noble cripple?" Elijah's hand tightened on his rifle, but his voice stayed steady. "State your business and get off my land." "Our land," Grace corrected, drawing strength from the word. "Half mine by deed and law, and all of it protected by friends you didn't count on us having." As if summoned by her words, riders appeared on the ridge behind the house. Sheriff Daniels, Doc Morrison, Tom Garrett and his father, 2 other ranchers from the valley. Word had spread fast when Tom spotted the dust cloud. "Henrietta," Sheriff Daniels called out, riding down slowly. "Thought I told you to keep your business out of my jurisdiction." "I'm conducting legal recovery of stolen property," she replied, but some of the confidence had left her voice. "Funny thing about that." The sheriff produced a telegram from his vest. "Had this from the territorial marshal. Seems there's warrants out for a woman matching your description. Something about forged papers and illegal trafficking." The change was instant. "Mrs." Blackwood's men shifted, hands moving toward weapons. The air crackled with potential violence. Now, Doc Morrison said mildly, but his shotgun was prominently displayed. "No need for bloodshed, not with ladies present." "Ladies?" "Mrs." Blackwood laughed bitterly. "You mean my runaway merchandise?" That was when they heard it. Horses, many of them, approaching fast, everyone tensed, weapons raising, until the riders crested the hill. Grace gasped. 3 familiar faces led the group, Mary, Rosa, and little Sarah from the wagon train. But they rode freely, accompanied by what looked like a federal marshal and several deputies. "Marshal Conway," Sheriff Daniels said with evident relief. "Good timing." The marshal, a grizzled man with keen eyes, surveyed the scene. "Mrs. Henrietta Blackwood, also known as Black Hen Hendricks, you're under arrest for violation of federal trafficking laws." "This is ridiculous." "Mrs." Blackwood sputtered. "I run a legitimate employment agency. Tell that to these young ladies." Marshal Conway indicated the 3 girls. "They've given testimony about being sold against their will. Several of them underage, their documents forged." Sarah, little Sarah, who'd been so frightened in the wagon, spoke up with surprising strength. She sold me to a saloon in Silver City. Said I was 18 when I'm barely 15, Rosa too, and Mary to worse. We escaped, Rosa added, her dark eyes fierce. Found our way to the marshal's office, told them everything, names, dates, places. How many girls you've sold over the years? Mrs. Blackwood's face had gone pale. You can't prove anything. It's their word against the ledgers we seized from your office in Tucson. Marshal Conway interrupted. Very detailed records. Mrs. Blackwood. Names, prices, buyers, including one Grace Sullivan, sold to Elijah Monroe. He turned to Grace and Elijah, which makes you witnesses, not criminals. Though I understand congratulations are in order on your recent marriage. Thank you, Marshal. Grace managed, her voice steady despite the emotions coursing through her. The arrest happened quickly after that. Mrs. Blackwood's men, seeing which way the wind blew, surrendered their weapons without fight as the deputies secured the prisoners. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes found Grace one last time. You think you've won, she hissed, but you'll always be what I made you. Bought goods, his purchased bride. Grace stepped forward, Elijah's hand warm on her back. No, I'm what I chose to be. A rancher, a wife, a free woman. You had no power to make me anything, only to delay me finding my true self. The federal party left with their prisoners, but the three girls remained. Grace found herself surrounded by familiar faces, tears flowing freely as they embraced. How was all she could manage. Rosa, Mary explained. She remembered what you said about choosing. When things got bad, she chose to fight. Got us all out, found help. The marshal says we can testify, then go wherever we want. Sarah added, wonder in her young voice. I might go back east, find my aunt. Stay here tonight, Grace insisted. Rest, eat, decide tomorrow. As the sun set, their home overflowed with unexpected guests. The kitchen table, usually set for two, groaned under the weight of food the neighbors had brought. Laughter filled the spaces where silence had lived so long. Grace stood on the porch, watching it all, when Elijah found her. Too much, he asked, sliding his arms around her. No, it's perfect. She leaned into him. They're free, all of them, thanks to their courage and yours. I had help. She turned in his arms. A stubborn rancher who saw me as more than my circumstances. You were always more. I just gave you space to prove it. They were interrupted by Tom Garrett, practically bouncing with excitement. Mr. Monroe, Miss Grace, the marshal says there might be a reward for helping capture Black Hen Hendricks. That's what they called her in Texas. Keep it, Elijah said immediately. Split it among the girls. They'll need traveling money. Grace kissed his cheek. See, Noble. Inside, Rosa was regaling the room with tales of their escape, her natural storytelling gift evident. Mary sat quietly beside Doc Morrison, who was gently checking an injured wrist. Sarah had attached herself to Mrs. Garrett, soaking up maternal kindness like parched earth taking rain. They'll be all right, Sheriff Daniels said, joining Grace and Elijah. Strong women, all of them, like someone else I know. Thank you, Grace said, for coming, for believing. Thank Monroe, the sheriff replied. He rode to town at dawn, asked us to be ready, said he had a feeling Blackwood would make one last try. Grace looked at her husband in surprise. You knew? Suspected. You've been happy lately. In my experience, that's when trouble likes to call. The evening wore on, full of stories and plans. Mary would go to California, try her hand at seamstress work. Rosa thought she might head to Denver, find work in a newspaper office. I've got stories to tell now. Sarah would indeed search for her aunt, armed with the marshal's protection and letters of recommendation. As guests began departing, Grace found herself beside the three girls one last time. "You saved yourselves," she told them. "Remember that? No one gave you freedom, you took it. You showed us it was possible." Rosa countered, "When you stayed that night at Monroe's ranch, when we all thought, but you chose differently, that mattered." After they'd gone to bed, the girls sharing the loft while Grace and Elijah took his old room, the house settled into quiet. Grace couldn't sleep, her mind too full of the day's events. "She's really gone," she whispered in the darkness. "It's over." "That part is," Elijah agreed, pulling her closer. "Now comes the rest." The rest: living, building, being ordinary people with an ordinary life. After everything, ordinary sounds wonderful. He laughed softly. "Woman, there's nothing ordinary about you, but we can try for peaceful, maybe even boring." "Boring," Grace mused. "Feeding chickens, mending fences, arguing about the account books, watching sunsets, planning for spring calves, teaching our children to ride." Grace stilled. "Children. If you want," his voice was carefully neutral. "I'm not young, but—" "Yes." She turned to face him in the darkness. "Yes to children. Yes to sunsets. Yes to the whole beautiful, ordinary life." They lay together, listening to the old house breathe around them. Somewhere, an owl called. In the barn, Tempest whickered. Even he'd been calmer lately, as if the ranch's new peace had reached him too. "I love you," Grace said, the words still fresh enough to feel like gifts. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "Thank you," he replied, "for saving me when I thought I was past saving." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The ranch needed work. The girls needed seeing off safely. Life needed living. But tonight, Grace Sullivan Monroe lay in the arms of the man who'd bought her as property and freed her as a person, who'd offered her choices when the world said she had none. She'd been sold to warm his bed. Instead, she'd warmed his heart, brightened his home, shared his life, and in choosing him, she'd found herself. The owl called again, a wild sound in the civilized darkness. Grace smiled and closed her eyes, finally and fully free. The autumn sun painted the valley gold. A year and a half after that desperate night when Grace had fought for her freedom. She stood on the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching Elijah work with a new colt in the corral. "Easy, boy." His voice carried on the crisp air. "Trust takes time." The colt, offspring of Tempest and Belle, danced sideways, but Elijah's patience never wavered. Grace smiled, remembering when she'd been the skittish one, learning to trust. Mrs. is. Monroe. Tom Garrett came riding up, no longer the boy who'd fetched the doctor, but a young man earning wages as their part-time hand. Letter from Denver. Grace's heart leaped. Rosa wrote regularly, her natural storytelling gift having found outlet in a newspaper column about women's experiences in the West. Each letter brought news of the others too, Mary thriving in San Francisco, Sarah reunited with her aunt and attending school. "Read it aloud." Elijah called, never taking his attention from the colt. "I want to hear too." Grace opened the letter, her reading much improved through Elijah's patient teaching. "Dearest Grace and Elijah, I write with such news the territorial legislature has passed new protections against the sale of persons, inspired in part by our testimony. Mrs. Blackwood, I still cannot call her by that other name, was sentenced to 15 years. More importantly, her network has been dismantled. No more wagons of frightened girls, no more auctions disguised as employment." She continued reading Rosa's vivid descriptions of Denver life, her work at the newspaper, even a tentative courtship with a young printer. But Grace's mind lingered on those first lines. Their suffering had led to change, protection for others. "Good news," Elijah said, leaving the colt to approach the porch. His limp was barely noticeable now, regular work having strengthened the damaged leg. The best, she folded the letter carefully. To know it meant something, that other girls won't face what we did. He climbed the steps, pressed a kiss to her temple. How's our little one today? Active. I think he takes after his father, stubborn and restless. She takes after her mother, he countered, strong and determined. They'd had this playful argument for months now, neither willing to concede. Doc Morrison just laughed and said babies would be whatever they chose, regardless of parents' guesses. The Garretts are coming for supper, Grace reminded him, and the sheriff might stop by. Full house again. But his smile showed he didn't mind. The isolated ranch had become a gathering place, their table extending to encompass a growing circle of friends. As Grace moved to go inside, a cramp seized her. She gasped, gripping the doorframe. Grace, Elijah's voice sharpened with concern. I think it's time. The next hours blurred together. Tom riding hard for Doc Morrison. Elijah's steady presence as the pains intensified. Mrs. Garrett arriving to help, her calm competence a blessing. Through it all, Grace held tight to Elijah's hand, drawing strength from his unwavering support. You're doing fine, he murmured, bathing her face with cool water. Bravest woman I know. Scared, she admitted between contractions. Me too, but we'll face it together, like everything else. Night fell. The doctor arrived, pronouncing everything normal if slow. Grace wanted to laugh. Nothing about her life had been normal. Why should this be different? I can see the head, Doc Morrison announced near midnight. One more push, Grace. She bore down with everything she had. Elijah's encouragement in her ear, then a cry, fierce and strong, filling the room. A daughter, the doctor said, placing the squalling infant on Grace's chest. Healthy and perfect. Grace stared down at the tiny face, overwhelmed. This little life, created in love, born in freedom. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She's beautiful, Elijah whispered, his own eyes wet, like her mother. What will you call her, Mrs.? Garrett asked, bustling about with warm blankets. Grace looked at Elijah. They'd discussed names for months, but now only one seemed right. Hope, she said softly. Hope Maria Monroe. Elijah's breath caught. After new beginnings. And yes, after her too. She was part of your story, which makes her part of ours. He kissed her then, gentle and reverent. Thank you. The days that followed passed in a blur of feedings and diapers, of marveling at tiny fingers and toes. The ranch work continued, Tom and Elijah managing together while Grace recovered. Neighbors stopped by with food and congratulations. Even crusty Sheriff Daniels went soft at the sight of baby Hope. 2 weeks after the birth, Grace sat in the rocking chair Elijah had made, nursing Hope while he worked on the account books. The domesticity of it struck her. How far they'd come from that rain-soaked night when she'd arrived as purchased property. I've been thinking, Elijah said, not looking up from his figures, about the future. Oh. The ranch is doing well, better than well, and with the railway coming through next year, land prices will rise. He set down his pencil. We could sell, move somewhere easier, California, maybe give Hope opportunities we didn't have. Grace considered this, studying his face. Is that what you want? I want what's best for our family. That's not what I asked. He smiled, caught out. No, it's not. He moved to sit beside her chair, one finger gently stroking Hope's downy head. I love this land, these mountains, the life we've built here. Then we stay. Hope will have opportunities because she'll have parents who choose their own path. That's worth more than any city comfort. You're sure? I'm sure this is home. A knock interrupted them. Grace covered herself as Elijah answered the door, returning with an unexpected guest. "Sarah!" Grace exclaimed. The girl, young woman now, stood hesitant in the doorway. She wore a proper traveling dress, her hair pinned up like a lady, but her eyes were the same, seeking approval. "I'm sorry to intrude." Sarah began. "I'm traveling back east for school. My aunt insists on finishing school. Can you imagine? But I had to stop, to see you, to say—" She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "To say thank you, not for saving me. Rosa was right. We saved ourselves, but for showing me it was possible. That night when Mrs. Blackwood left you here, I thought your life was over. Instead, you made it begin." "Sarah, Please, let me finish." Sarah stepped closer, her voice stronger. "I've been accepted to a teaching college. I'm going to be a teacher. Help other girls like us, girls who think they have no choices. Because of you, I know better." Grace felt tears threaten. "You did this yourself, your strength, your choices. Maybe, but you lit the way." Sarah's eyes fell on Hope. "Oh, she's perfect. What's her name?" "Hope." "Of course it is." Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her face. "May I—" Grace carefully transferred the sleeping infant. Sarah held her with wonder. This girl who'd been sold as a woman, now becoming one on her own terms. They talked until the stage arrived. Promises to write exchanged. As the coach pulled away, Elijah wrapped his arm around Grace's waist. "Proud of her?" he asked. "Proud of all of us. We survivors." That evening, as autumn wind rattled the windows, they sat before the fire. Hope slept in her cradle, Elijah whittled a toy horse, and Grace worked on mending, the ordinary evening she dreamed of, made real through choice and struggle. "I love you," she said suddenly, needing to voice it. He looked up, that slow smile that still made her heart race spreading across his face. "And I love you, both of you." Even when hope keeps us awake all night. Especially then, means she's healthy, strong, free to cry when she needs to. Grace set aside her mending, moved to sit beside him on the floor, her back against his chair. His hand found her hair, stroking gently. "Sometimes I think about it," she said quietly. "If Mrs. Blackwood hadn't taken me from the orphanage, if you hadn't needed help, if any one thing had been different, then we wouldn't have this." His hand stilled. "Does that make the wrong things right? I don't know, but I'm grateful for where it led. The preacher would say God works in mysterious ways. Maybe, or maybe we just made the best of bad circumstances. Either way, we're here now." Hope stirred, making soft baby sounds. Grace rose to tend her, lifting her daughter with practiced ease. As she settled back in the rocking chair, Elijah began to hum, an old lullaby she'd taught him, one the sisters had sung at the orphanage. The circle complete, songs passed down, stories shared, love chosen and rechosen daily. "Tell me a story," Grace said, knowing he'd understand which one. Elijah smiled, settling into his chair. "Once upon a time, there was a soldier who thought his life was over, and a girl who thought hers would never begin, but fate or chance or God brought them together on a rainy night." He told their story as hope nursed, the familiar words made new through repetition, how the broken soldier learned to hope, how the purchased girl claimed her freedom, how love grew from respect, choice from circumstance, family from two lost souls finding home in each other. Outside, wind howled down from the mountains, but inside was warm and safe. The ranch was thriving, their daughter was healthy, and their love had proven stronger than any bill of sale. Grace had been sold to warm a stranger's bed. Instead, she'd warmed a home, healed a heart, built a life, and in the end, that transaction meant for evil had led to this. A family formed not from ownership but from choice, held together not by papers but by love. The fire crackled. Hope sighed contentedly, and in their hard-won home. Grace Sullivan Monroe rocked her freeborn daughter and knew that some stories, no matter how dark their beginning, could still find their way to light. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts about Grace and Elijah's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of courage, redemption, and love against all odds. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more people discover this story of hope and freedom. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset.